Hello, I'm Julie Andrews. In the 1960s, the traditional Broadway musical fell out of step as rock music, the civil rights movement, and the Vietnam War had a profound effect on American culture. But beginning with West Side Story, a new generation of creative talent reimagined what the musical could do. Songwriters like Stephen Sondheim, Bach and Harnick, Kander and Ebb, along with directors such as Hal Prince, Bob Fosse, Michael Bennett, created astonishing new works, new sounds, and a bold new tradition for Broadway.
What I like best about West Side Story is it's an amalgam of book, music, lyrics, and dance. In that sense, it's a remarkable piece, I think. You're going to see a kind of choreographed movement that's neither ballet nor traditional musical comedy dance. But you're going to see action in movement. That was what was new about West Side Story.
I think Jerry Robbins' choreography is an authorship in that show. I don't think all choreography always is, but certainly in that show. The marriage of dance movement and storytelling was new to the theater.
Jerome Robbins was the prime example of the idea that someone could direct and choreograph a Broadway musical, that they weren't two separate jobs to be given to two different people, but that the whole thing could move as one. Other people had done it before him, for instance, Agnes DeMille, and he took things like the idea of the Dream Ballet, Oklahoma, and applied it to the whole piece.
In the 1950s, while the choreographer Jerome Robbins was making his mark on Broadway with such shows as The King and I and Peter Pan, he was also developing a pet project, adapting Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet into a musical.
Tonight, tonight, it all began tonight. I saw you and the world went away. Tonight, tonight, there's only you tonight. What you...
I read it and I said, what the hell would I do to try to make this alive? And I thought, well, what if I made it today? How would I feel about it? And that was it. That's all I needed, and bang, I was into it.
I know now I was wrong.
Robbins collaborated with playwright Arthur Lawrence and composer Leonard Bernstein, and they set the tragedy amid the warring gangs of New York City.
There was one area where we did break new ground, and that is in the subject matter. That was the beginning of it being okay to die, to be raped, to be murdered in a musical. At the same time, Lenny Bernstein's music was different from anybody who has ever written for musical theater. I think it's the most exciting thing about West Side Story. It has a vitality, an energy, an originality, and it says America to me.
Life can be bright in America.
If you can fight in America.
Life is all right in America.
If you're all white in America.
He
The show is driven by the music. It's intense from beginning to end. It is a mixture of Wagner, Stravinsky, Mahler, Mambo, Broadway. It's all rolled into one. It packs a punch.
In bringing his great talent as a symphonic composer, Leonard Bernstein made a kind of score that had rhythms that people just hadn't had on Broadway. And then you have the genius of Robbins' choreography and direction. The influences, inspirations are still so potent today in its clothing and its look and its stylization. I think that West Side Story was the forerunner of all MTV with its style, putting people stylized dancing in the middle of streets, as in the movie.
When West Side Story opened in 1957, its reviews were mixed. Broadway's smash hit that season was actually The Music Man, featuring a very different kind of dance in the gymnasium.
People walk out on shows, and those are very often the shows that become historical. And if you told them, you know, you walked out on West Side Story in 1957, I did not. Yes, you did, and you walked out with 98 other people every night that the show ran on Broadway. No kidding, right. And a few years later, it was, you know, West Side Story.
West Side Story not only brought decidedly untraditional subject matter to the musical stage, it ushered in a new breed of director-choreographer who insisted on performers who could dance, sing, and act. The show also united two ambitious and talented young friends. A 29-year-old producer, Harold Prince, who wanted to direct, and a 27-year-old lyricist, Stephen Sondheim, who wanted to compose.
I just wanted to meet Leonard Bernstein. I called Oscar Hammerstein, and I said, you know, I don't want to do just lyrics for anything. I want to write music. And he said, I think it would be a very good idea for you. He said, it'll frustrate you about writing music, but these are professionals and distinguished ones, Robbins and Bernstein and Lawrence, and I think you would learn a lot. So I did, and I did learn a lot.
We were good friends. And it's true, we sat in Walgreens drugstore and ate bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwiches and talked about the theater and what we'd like to do in it.
It would be 13 years before Hal Prince would direct a Stephen Sondheim show. But together, they would reimagine what a musical could sing about on Broadway. The late 1950s and early 1960s produced some of Broadway's most memorable musicals. Gypsy, starring Ethel Merman as an overbearing showbiz mother.
Well, you'll be great. Gonna have the whole world on a plate.
Bye Bye Birdie, a parody of Elvis Presley and the dangers of rock and roll. Camelot, the King Arthur story that became indelibly linked to the Kennedy presidency. And How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, a satirical send-up of America's corporate culture. 1964 was a watershed year, with Barbra Streisand immortalizing the role of Fanny Brice in Funny Girl.
Lovers are very special people. They're the luckiest people in the world.
That same season, Carol Channing starred in the nostalgic Hello, Dolly.
Look at that crowd up ahead. Hug me if my old spirit shows.
Channing was followed by a parade of musical theatre legends in the title role. Pearl Bailey, Ethel Merman, and Mary Martin, who brought the show to Vietnam to entertain American troops. But the biggest hit of 1964, which broke the record for the longest-running show in Broadway history, was perhaps the most unlikely. Fiddler on the Roof.
If I were a rich man, all day long I'd diddy bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. If I were a pretty rich,
Based on Sholem Aleichem's short stories depicting a Jewish village in 1905 Russia, Fiddler was the last original work Jerome Robbins created for Broadway.
The key to making Fiddler work was Jerome Robbins' idea. I can't tell you how many meetings we had where he said, "What is this story about?" And one of us said, "It's about the changing of a way of life, of a set of traditions." Robbins got very excited and he said, "Well, if it's about tradition, then we have to have an opening number which tells the audience what some of these traditions are."
Tradition, 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 tradition.
Tradition. It's this. It's that. It's everyone standing in a row, holding hands. This is the way we live. This is what we believe in. And those traditions are going to be broken. Fiddler is about that.
I remember the day that I registered at college, Fiddler on the Roof opened on Broadway. We didn't realize it at the time. It was the sunset of the old-style Broadway musical that came in with Rodgers and Hammerstein. The opening number, Tradition, was actually about the closing of an era of the Broadway musical. The curtain rose on Fiddler, but it came down on that kind of show.
It was really the advent of rock and roll that pushed Broadway musical out of the mainstream of American culture, because up until then, Broadway music had been the top 40, the top 10 hit parade music of the country, and that started to change. And by the late 1960s, it was a done deal.
Hello, Daddy. This is Nurse Daddy.
In May 1964, Louis Armstrong's rendition of Hello, Dolly spent a week at the top of the charts, breaking the Beatles' run of 3 straight months.
You keep flowing, still growing, you still going strong.
It was one of the last times in the 20th century that Broadway had a #1 hit song.
Well, the culture is definitely shifting, but Broadway, it was basically trying to ignore the 60s. The typical musical at the height of the Vietnam War could be something like How Now, Dow Jones, you know, or George M. Shows that are promises that have absolutely nothing to do with the main culture of the moment. It was really the consummation of Broadway musical falling out of sync with pop culture.
By 1966, protests and demonstrations were becoming an unavoidable presence across America. Hal Prince, now directing shows, was inspired by the civil rights struggle as he prepared a new work with music and lyrics by John Kander and Fred Ebb.
It was very stormy in our country when I started work on Cabaret. And I brought in a photograph from Life magazine, a 2-page spread of a bunch of Aryan Nazi boys snarling at the camera. And of course, it was in our country, and it was them snarling at some poor little black girl. So I use that to support the contention that wherever human beings are, terrible things potentially can happen.
Cabaret was an adaptation of the Berlin stories of Christopher Isherwood and a play based on them. The show depicted the debauchery of Berlin between the wars and the Nazi rise to power, presented by a master of ceremonies at the Kit Kat Club.
I was in the army in 1949 in Germany. I went to a little nightclub called Maxime's, which was in the cellar of a bombed-out church. And there, a very diminutive MC came out with lipstick on his mouth and eyelashes and rouge to hide how really old he was.
Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. Fremde, étranger, stranger. Glücklich zu sehen, just vis enchanté. Happy to see you, bleibe reste stay.
Joel Grey, made up in a way that even if you knew what he looked like, he'd be unrecognizable, comes out and starts singing a song that we all know now as Willkommen. But my friend Sarah Fishko and I looked at each other and said, is this show in German? We didn't know what it was. It was very out there, and it had all this sort of androgynous sexuality. It was mind-blowing. And the audience was baffled. It had a stronger effect on me than Fiddler 2 years earlier had, or Hello, Dolly. You felt you were seeing something completely different.
Cabaret, I would say, pushed the envelope of what people were seeing in the Broadway musical. Most people thought it was a terrible idea, a musical about Nazi Germany, but Hal and John and Fred and Joe Masteroff had this very dark vision, and they found a framework in terms of the cabaret songs in which the musical numbers commented on the action.
Boris Aronson did the original set. Nobody's ever been greater designer than Boris Aronson. There were 2 musicals on stage. One took place in real rooms and one took place in Limbo. And in Limbo were these numbers which indirectly commented on the real book upstage. Somewhere in the middle of the second act, Sally Bowles leaves the real world, walks through a mylar curtain into the unreal Limbo world and sings Cabaret.
What good is sitting alone in your room? Come hear the music play. Life is a cabaret, old chum.
At the end of that song, she goes and gets an abortion. What she's found out at the beginning of the song is that she's pregnant. What she decides at the end of the song is that she doesn't want to have the baby.
Right this way, our table's waiting. Start by admitting.
That's a pretty powerful material for a Broadway musical comedy.
I think that the thing that you have to take on board is the profound disruption of Vietnam.
This is the dawning of the age.
And the awareness of the American public that they were in this terrible war that they couldn't get out of, that they really was not winnable, and it was on some level probably unjust. In song and theater, there was a great deal of protest against the war. And it divided the culture.
By 1967, the war in Vietnam and the protests against it were polarizing the country. Two young actors, Jerome Ragney and James Rado, seized upon that friction as the storyline for a new musical production. For backing, they sought out Joseph Papp, a maverick producer who had just created the Public Theater, a non-commercial venue downtown. Known for presenting Shakespeare in Central Park, Papp was also a champion of contemporary theater.
Vietnam was a major plot point in the show, but the war wasn't really the main thing. The main thing was the lifestyle. It seemed to be more about hippies. You know, growing their hair long and living in wearing different kind of clothes.
Gimme a head with hair, long, beautiful hair, shining, gleaming, steaming, flaxen, waxen.
The show was called Hair. It was the first Broadway musical with an entire score of rock music.
Blow it, show it, long it's got been growing.
I'd never seen a Broadway musical when I wrote Hair. I like funky music. So that was and then when they said, well, we want a rock and roll score, I said, well, to me, that's what I do.
Hair was the first show that allowed the generation gap that had appeared at this point in time when civil protest, rock and roll, and dope, all of it arrived at the same time. Somehow at this show, parents went because they wanted to understand their kids. Kids went because they wanted to show their parents what it was. It filled that gap very, very well.
Every singer, dancer, hippie, panther, you name it, we were all online waiting to audition for this show. And we went into a series of rehearsals like I'd never seen before, unlike any other theatrical show I think I've worked on. We did a lot of exercises dealing with caring for one another, loving one another, in order to be loving to the audience.
We starve, look at one another, short of breath, walking proudly in our winter coats, wearing smells from laboratories, facing our dying nation.
With its downtown run completed, the show moved first to a disco club called The Cheetah, and then, with new director Tom O'Horgan at the helm, Hair moved to the Biltmore Theatre. Drug use, obscene language, a cast intermingling with the audience, and frontal nudity were all central to Broadway's newest hit.
I think it affected a lot of people. People still come up to me, and say that it changed their life. But I don't know if it changed Broadway very much. I mean, we had our little day in the sun, and then we retired.
Hair ran on Broadway for 4 sold-out years. Along with its enduring hit songs, the show helped to establish the world of off-Broadway and Joe Papp's Public Theater as important new players in the development of the commercial musical.
Another 100 people just got off of the train and came up through the ground, while another 100 people just got off of the bus and are looking around at another 100 people who
the boss maybe yesterday. It's a city of strangers. Some come to work, some to play. A city of strangers.
It really wasn't until Steve Sondheim came along with Company that somebody was able to take all the stuff that had happened before, the Rodgers and Hammerstein influence, the director influence, the choreographer influence, all that stuff, and morph into something new that sort of said, okay, that's that, now we're into another.
By the end of the 60s, Stephen Sondheim had collaborated on 6 Broadway shows. He followed up his lyric writing for West Side Story with another landmark, Gypsy, and then wrote both music and lyrics for a string of shows, including A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. In 1970, Sondheim teamed up with Hal Prince on Company and plunged the musical into a new era.
I wanted you to read them because I thought...
The show was based upon a group of short plays by George Furth, which dramatized the realities of married life in New York City.
It's the little things you do together, that make perfect relationships. The hobbies you pursue together, savings you accrue together, looks you misconstrue together, that make marriage a joy.
Company does deal with upper middle class people with upper middle class problems. Broadway theater has been, for many years, supported by those people. They really want to escape, and here we're saying, bring it right back in their faces. What they've been trying to, what they came to a musical to avoid, they suddenly find facing them on the stage.
It's not so hard to be married. It's much the simplest of crimes. It's not so hard to be married.
I've done it 3 or 4 times.
In addition to the provocative subject matter, Sondheim and Prince also challenged the audience by deconstructing the storyline of the musical.
Probably the major thing that made Company controversial was that there was no plot. The audience kept waiting for a plot.
We played with nonlinear storytelling. Obviously, I had preceded it with Cabaret, which was both linear and nonlinear. Now we made our way right into a whole nonlinear evening.
The notion of a series of snapshots in a man's life taking place in a metaphysical birthday party, and it keeps changing and flowing back and forth, and you don't know if the guests know each other, and there's a girl in a bridal gown, and it's all very weird.
Pardon me, is everybody here? Because if everybody's here, I want to thank you all for coming to the wedding. I appreciate you going even more. I mean, you must know it's a better thing to do and not a word but you Paul. I'm Paul, you know the man I'm going to marry, but I'm not because it wouldn't ruin anyone as wonderful as he is.
Thank you all for the gifts and the flowers. Thank you all. Now it's back to the showers. Don't tell Paul, but I'm not getting married today.
The cast of Company inhabited an abstract urban world and rode a working elevator within Boris Aronson's Jungle Gym set. The show's songs did not emerge from scenes as in traditional musicals. Instead, they provided commentary on the characters or their situations.
All the numbers in Company are inserted like nuts into a fruitcake. They're inserted into the scenes, or they occupy, as in the case of Barcelona, the whole scene. But none of them just arises out of dialogue the way, you know, I'd been trained to do by Oscar Hammerstein.
Where you going? Barcelona. Oh, don't get up.
Do you have to?
Yes, I have to. Oh, don't get up.
When Company opened in April of 1970, its cynical view of modern relationships and marriage polarized the Broadway audience.
Musicals for decades have had no doubts about if you find the right person, you may go the rocky road of love, but it would always lead to a so-called happy ending. We were saying something ambiguous, which is actually there are no endings. It keeps going on, is what really Company's about.
Broadway was always about fun, about joy, whereas the city was a plaything for Gershwin. In Sondheim's world, it's a place where you lose things, where you can't find yourself, where you're alienated, where another 100 people come out of the subway. So it's an ambivalent ending. But I think to the extent that those endings are earned, they are more mature and more interesting to sing about.
Oh, well, I guess. Okay.
What?
I'll stay.
They still want a happy ending. And a happy ending can have a lot of people dead, like West Side Story, but it's still a happy ending.
By the early 70s, New York City, like the rest of America, was in a deep recession. And nowhere was that more evident than on the Great White Way.
This area in the 70s was a sewer. This was the den of pornography, prostitution, felony crime, drug dealing, you name it.
What Broadway needed was a hit. This time, it would come not from a big-time star, but from the supporting cast, the dancers, the self-titled gypsies who provided the backbone of a musical.
Of course, dancers on Broadway are blue-collar workers. It's a life commitment, and it's something that either you have inside of you and you have to do it, or maybe you should go sell hamburgers instead, because it's not for sissies, contrary to popular belief.
It was a former gypsy who reinvigorated Broadway, making dance so popular that leg warmers became a fashion statement. Michael DeFilia first appeared in a touring company of West Side Story, but on Broadway, he became known as Michael Bennett.
I met Michael on Hullabaloo, a TV variety show, in 1964. One day, we're dancing side by side, and we're bringing the jerk to new heights, and I say, Michael, what are you gonna do when you grow up? You can't keep doing this the rest of your life. Did you ever think of that, huh? And he said, yes, I'm gonna be a choreographer. And I went, oh, good luck. Don't forget about me.
Bennett got his first job choreographing on Broadway in 1966. He went on to stage dance numbers in Company and, with Hal Prince, co-directed Sondheim's next musical, Follies. In 1973, Bennett began to work on his own show. Without any pre-existing story, he held a series of workshops where he tape-recorded dancers talking about their experiences.
When we started a chorus line, it was called the Dancers Project, and it was a secret. We would start every day with a blank page, and our lives were a part of the process.
You know, this was the first time there was such a thing as a workshop. And we were young guys, and we were all just desperate to put on something very special, very new. All we talked about is, let's do something on Broadway like they've never seen before.
Again, step, kick, kick.
With backing from Joseph Papp, Bennett spent an unprecedented 18 months developing the musical. A plotline emerged about dancers auditioning for a part in a new show.
That connects with turn, turn, out, in, jump, step, step, kick, kick, leap, kick, touch. Got it? Going on. A 5, 6, 7, 8, a turn, turn, touch.
In the beginning, there was a very difficult balance between making this about dancers but not making this about dancers.
A 5, 6, 7, 8, a turn, turn, touch, down.
At what point can you get away from the dancer metaphor and get into the world of we're all on a line? We're all in this together.
Who am I anyway? Am I my resume? So many faces all around, and here we go. I need this job. Oh God, I need this show.
That did not happen until one day in rehearsal that Michael Bennett took a chalk and went wham and drew a line on the floor. And he said, That's the line. We're all on the line. Well, now the common denominator of all these people is, God, I hope I get it. I hope I get it. Well, da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
I'll never make it. I'll never make it. He doesn't like the way I look. He doesn't like the way I dance. He doesn't like the way
Everyone has dreams and hopes, and there was something in that show for everybody. Men who were just retired would write me letters and say, your character made me go out and start a new business. Football players would say, the line. They would talk about the line, being on the line.
Most dramatically, for the show's finale, Bennett transformed a classic Broadway kick line into a bittersweet comment on the life of a dancer.
Singular sensation, every little step she takes. One thrilling combination, every move that she makes.
You had an entire, 2 hours talking about these individual people and that all this torture they have to go through to get a job, to be on Broadway, is to be in an assembly line. That was the genius of Michael. He gave the audience what they expected. What he meant was something else.
A chorus line opened at the Public Theater and quickly moved to the Shubert on Broadway in July of 1975. It stayed there for over 15 years, breaking all existing box office records.
Michael Bennett and the chorus line totally changed the musical theater. It really saved the financial fortunes of the Shubert organization. It was a catalyst for the improvement of this area. And of course, this area now is the most desirable area in New York.
I saw a chorus line at the Shubert Theater in Chicago. I was in the last row of the last balcony. I saw the show. I went back to my dancing school, to my teacher, and I said, you've got to teach me to do turn, turn, out, in, jump, step, which was in the opening combination. 2 years later, I auditioned, I got the show, and I went on tour with the show. And when I went on the first time, I was doing the opening combination, and I remember thinking to myself, I wonder who's in the back row. True story.
At the same time a chorus line was moving to Broadway, a new musical was staged by another dancer-turned-director, Bob Fosse.
The winner is Bob Fosse.
In 1973, he became the only person ever to win the Triple Crown of directing. The Emmy Award for Liza with a Z, the Tony for Pippin, and the Oscar for Cabaret.
Being characteristically a pessimist and cynic, this and some of the other nice things that have happened to me in the last couple of days may turn me into some sort of hopeful optimist and ruin my whole life.
Fosse was a show business veteran. He began dancing as a child in an act called the Riff Brothers and worked his way up to dance both on Broadway and in Hollywood.
When I first met him, he auditioned to be a dancer in movies, and he had no idea he was going to be a choreographer. And in my opinion, he was going to be as good a song and dance man as Kelly and Astaire. I thought, Fosse, this guy is going to be it.
Fosse's distinctive style was evident from the first musical he choreographed, The Pajama Game. While working on his next production, Damn Yankees, he met Gwen Verdon and ended up creating 5 shows for her. Verdon became the quintessential Fosse dancer, and in time, his wife as well.
Who's got the pain when they do the mambo? Who's got the pain when they go up? Who's got the pain when they do the mambo? I don't know who. Do you?
He loved women. He loved to make them look beautiful. I think Gwen was the sexiest of them all because she had this angelic innocence about her.
Over the next 2 decades, Fosse refined his signature style.
I suppose if you repeat something enough times, it's called a style, you know. I started with hats because I began losing my hair very early. And I've always been slightly round-shouldered, and so I started to exaggerate that. And I don't have what the ballet dancers call a turnout. So I started turning my feet in, and I guess that's the style they talked about.
When you see his work, you know immediately that it's Fosse. Like if you see a Picasso, you know that it is Picasso. The lowering of the shoulders, the curved shoulder, the small pelvis work.
In 1975, Fosse created a musical out of a Prohibition-era story of corruption and murder. He turned to the composing team of Kander and Ebb, and together they beefed up its show business elements. Fosse's most enduring work for Broadway would be called Chicago.
They asked me if I knew how to adapt, because it was a very straight play, if I had any ideas of how to musicalize it. And so I came up with the vaudeville concept.
While Chicago was set in the past, the show sharply satirized an America obsessed with murder, sex, and celebrity. The lawyer, Billy Flynn, will do anything for a buck, but claims otherwise.
I don't care about expensive things, cashmere coats, diamond rings don't mean a thing. All I care about is love. That's what I'm here for.
He's a phony, and he comes out and sings a phony song about a phony emotion, and he doesn't mean it for a minute, and you can tell.
But all I care about is love.
That's what he's here for.
Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-boo-boo-boo. Ba-ba-ba-ba-boo.
It's an indictment of our pop culture, really.
All I care about is love.
Chicago had a style of black humor. It's almost like cabaret. There's a lot harking back to vaudeville and to burlesque, but always with that cynicism.
When Chicago opened in '75, it got very mixed reviews. Now the show is looked on as some sort of icon. And the fact is, it's the same music, the same text, the same lyrics, the same orchestrations.
People went in expecting to see a vaudeville, you know, a happy thing, and it was very dark. I don't think the public was really ready for it. And of course, it opened 5 days after Chorus Line, which made it very tough on the reviews. And it, like I say, it was a little ahead of its time.
We see his legacy living today. We see it in the film Chicago. We see it in the show Fosse. We see it everywhere. You see it in fashion, you see it on television, you see it in commercials. You see people every now and then with a black head or so, they're doing his style. That's the mark of a true artist.
I was younger then.
Tell him what I see.
I am in a tree, I am 10. I am in a tree.
I was younger then.
In 1976, during the celebration of the country's bicentennial, Stephen Sondheim and Hal Prince were exploring the dark side of American imperialism in Pacific Overtures. Set in 19th century Japan, John Weidman's story was told by an all-male Asian cast in a kabuki style.
If it happened, I was there. I saw everything. I was someone in a tree. Tell him what I see.
It was a daring, courageous thing we did, and we were extremely proud of it, and it was a success. It was a flop, but it was a success.
Throughout the 70s, Sondheim and Prince defied the optimistic conventions of the musical. Theatrical nostalgia turned bitter in Follies. And an operetta scored in three-quarter time, A Little Night Music, was fraught with anxiety. In 1979, they adapted the unthinkable into a Broadway musical. It was a tale of slaughter and cannibalism set in 19th century London, featuring the murderous barber, Sweeney Todd.
I thought it would be fun to see if you can scare a contemporary audience the way movies can scare you.
Attend the tale of Sweeney Todd. His skin was pale and his eye was hard. He shaved the faces of gentlemen who never thereafter were heard of again. He trod a path that you have trod. It's Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street.
We always wanted to go somewhere fresh and new. Sweeney Todd didn't hurt people's feelings. It was meant to thrill you. I'm much more interested in having an experience in the theater which is unlike the experience I'm having on the street.
In the opening number, having the rumbling music is very low, and I put it in as low a key as possible, this feeling. Now, right, and always with a slight crescendo. So there's always a little leaning in, as if something's about to happen and then doesn't. So the feeling is of lifting the voice a little bit and then dropping them, lifting and dropping. That may seem subtleties that nobody gets, but it creates a mood. And I don't think anybody would argue that the opening moments of this play are very creepy indeed.
Attend the tale of Sweeney Todd. He served a dark and avengeful God. What happened then? Well, that's the play, and he wouldn't want us to give it away. Not Sweeney. Not Sweeney Todd. The demon barber of Fleet Street.
Sweeney Todd is the grisly tale of a barber falsely convicted of a crime who returns to London seeking revenge. His victims' bodies are disposed of by cooking them into tasty meat pies.
Here we are, dear, hot out of the oven.
What is that?
It's crisp. Have a taste.
Is it really good?
Sir, it's too good, at least. Then again, they don't commit sins of the flesh, so it's pretty fresh.
The last line of the first act of Bond's play says they fall into each other's arms with laughter. And I thought, gee, that's a moment to sing about. And what are they laughing at? And then I thought, they're laughing at the prospect of what people will taste like.
This one might be a bit swingy, but then of course it's a fiddle player.
Oh, no, this isn't fiddle player. It's piccolo player.
How can you tell?
It's piping hot.
There's no one in first.
History of the world, my sweet.
Oh, Mr. Todd, what does it tell?
It's who gets eaten and who gets to eat.
Mr. Todd, too, Mr. Todd, who gets the sound?
But fortunately, it's also clear that everybody goes down well with beer.
Sondheim's dark vision had moved the musical to where an audience could identify with a tale of murder and cannibalism. As the score's intertwined arias reach their climax, Sweeney Todd enacts his vengeance on society.
And if you're beautiful, what then? With yellow hair like wheat, I think we shall not meet.
Revenge is universal, whether people will admit it or not. And that's what the piece is about. It's about revenge. And I think the audience senses that and they identify with Sweeney Todd.
Goodbye, Joanna. You're gone and yet you're mine. I'm fine, Joanna. I'm fine.
Musicals have always tried to keep the dark side of the culture out of the frame. Sondheim was the first person to try to sing about that darkness. The ultimate expression of that in his work would be Sweeney Todd, which is, I think, a masterpiece.
And in that darkness when I'm blind with what I can't forget, it's always morning in my mind, my little lamb.
He had a complete disregard, courageous disregard for what the public is maybe going to like or not like. Audience should damn well work a little harder and listen, even if the subject matter is distasteful to some people.
A
From tragic knife fights in West Side Story to vengeful throat slitting in Sweeney Todd, the Sondheim-Prince collaborations stood at the apex of a period that redefined the musical tradition on Broadway. By the end of the 1970s, inspired by the success of the chorus line, Broadway became the centerpiece of a new public relations campaign designed to attract tourists to New York.
There's only one Broadway. It's in New York.
I love New York. I love New York. I love New York.
Increasingly, the tourist trade has dominated Broadway, favoring revivals and nostalgic entertainments. But the most successful shows in the years to come, in fact, the most successful in Broadway history, came from theaters in London, where a young British producer found a way to make the American musical a truly international phenomenon.
I love New York at night. You never know who might appear. I love New York.